Some nights, the rain carries whispers of things forgotten, soft murmurs of names that were once spoken, and letters that never reached their home. Welcome, my dear listener, to Midnight Murmurs Radio. I am Ebeline Blackwood, and tonight we'll unfold a story soaked in mist, memory, and moonlight. This is Letters Lost in the Rain, a bedtime story, a sleep story, a relaxing story, and a gentle guided sleep meditation meant to quiet your thoughts and draw you into the coziest corners of night. Before we begin, find your most comfortable place. Lay your head upon your pillow, let your shoulders sink into the warmth beneath you. Take a deep breath in and exhale slowly. Feel your chest rise and fall, like the soft rhythm of rain upon the roof. Close your eyes now and imagine the sound of droplets tracing the glass one by one, slow and steady. Each one washing away a moment of worry, a thought of tomorrow, a shadow of the past. Tonight, you are safe. You are home. You are here with me. Our story begins on a quiet road just outside the small American town of Windmere Hollow, sometime in the 1930s. The streets are nearly empty, veiled in the hush of a late autumn rain. The only light comes from the dim yellow glow of gas lamps swaying in the wind, and the rhythmic clatter of an old bicycle rolling through puddles. Its rider, a young postman named Samuel Whitford, leans forward against the rain, his coat drenched, his satchel heavy with letters that were never meant to wait. He hums softly to himself, the tune barely audible over the storm, something his mother used to sing before sleep, an old lullaby about home and the sea. But tonight, something feels different. The air is thick, and every shadow seems to breathe in his satchel, among dozens of envelopes. There's one he doesn't remember collecting, a pale blue letter sealed in wax that glimmers faintly even in the rain. The name reads, "For Eleanor Vane, delivered by moonlight." Samuel frowns. There's no such address, no such name on his route. Yet, as thunder murmurs over the hills, he feels a strange pull, a quiet insistence to find this Eleanor, wherever she might be. He turns down an old lane, one that locals call Hollow Road, where the trees bend low and the fog gathers thick as wool. The bicycle wobbles over the uneven path, and every turn of the wheel seems to draw him deeper into something both familiar and forgotten. He doesn't see the old manor at first. It's hidden behind ivy and rain, but when lightning flashes, he catches a glimpse of it. Towering chimneys, shuttered windows, and a single lamp glowing faintly in the upstairs window. For a moment, Samuel hesitates. The house had been abandoned for years, since the night of the great storm, when the Vane family was said to have vanished. Yet the letter in his bag seems to hum, faintly, as if urging him forward. So he knocks. Once, twice. The sound is swallowed by rain. Then, from within, a slow creak answers, the door easing open. Though no hand seems to touch it, Samuel whispers into the dark, his voice trembling just slightly. "Delivery for Eleanor Vane." Only the rain replies, tapping against the wooden porch like a heartbeat. And yet, something shifts. A faint scent of lavender drifts through the air. Somewhere upstairs, A piano note rings out, soft, distant, aching, the same tune his mother once sang. He calls again, but the sound dissolves into mist. The letter slips from his fingers, landing on the wet floorboards, the ink already bleeding. As he kneels to pick it up, he notices the handwriting has changed. It now reads, "For the one who still remembers." The rain grows heavier. The lamp in the window flickers once, then fades. And in that perfect silence between thunder and memory, Samuel whispers, "Who are you?" But the house, as if listening, only sighs. And somewhere far beyond the veil of sleep, the story begins to breathe. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Asterisk. The rain had softened to a whisper by the time Samuel stepped across the threshold of the Vane house. The air was colder inside, as though the walls themselves had been holding their breath for decades. He stood for a moment, listening to the slow drip of water from his coat, to the faint ticking of a clock that must have stopped years ago, and to that distant piano note that seemed to linger somewhere deep within the house. "Hello." His voice barely stirred the air. The silence that followed was not empty. It felt crowded, filled with unseen presences, the residue of laughter and sorrow that clung to forgotten rooms. His boots pressed into the dust, leaving clear marks that glistened with rain. The smell was of cedar and damp paper. He glanced down at the letter, still clutched in his hand. The ink, now smudged, the wax seal faintly warm, as though touched by a living hand. For a moment, he thought he saw words shifting upon the paper, rearranging themselves in the candlelight. "For the one who still remembers." He swallowed hard. The lamp near the staircase flickered once, then held steady. He told himself it was only the draught, only the dampness of old wires, but the part of him that still believed in his mother's bedtime prayers whispered otherwise. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked. Samuel moved slowly up the staircase, his fingers trailing the banister worn smooth by time. Each step sighed beneath his weight. When he reached the landing, he found a hallway stretching before him lined with portraits, their faces faded, but their eyes strangely bright, like the rain itself had left a sheen of life upon them. One portrait caught his attention. A young woman, her expression calm yet sorrowful, seated by a window with a letter in her hand. Beneath it, in cursive, read the name Eleanor Vane. The sight made his heart stumble. She was beautiful in a quiet, haunting way, the sort of beauty that felt half dream, half memory. And though he knew he had never met her, he felt a flicker of recognition, as if she had been waiting for him across the years. He took a step closer. The candlelight trembled, and the painted eyes seemed to follow his every movement. Then, so softly he might have imagined, it came a voice. It was not clear, but it was there, carried upon the faint echo of the rain. "You came back," it whispered. Samuel froze, the letter trembling in his hand. "Who's there?" Ashkip. The sound faded, replaced by the steady patter of rain against the glass. He turned toward the source, a doorway at the end of the hall, slightly ajar, a thread of pale blue light spilling from within. He approached, slowly, his heart thudding like a drum muffled by distance. Inside was what must once have been a music room. A grand piano stood near the window, its keys gleaming faintly beneath the moonlight. One of them, the highest note, pressed down on its own, releasing a single sound, pure and lonely. Samuel felt the air stir beside him. He turned, expecting to see a curtain swaying, but there was nothing, only that same scent of lavender, soft and persistent. He whispered, "Eleanor?" and immediately felt foolish for saying it aloud. Yet in that moment the air seemed to warm, as if in response. The letter in his hand pulsed faintly, and when he looked down again, the words had changed once more. "Deliver it. Deliver it, and you'll see." The script shimmered for an instant, then blurred away. "Deliver it where? Muro. De." The piano answered another note, deeper this time, resonating through the room like a sigh from another world. He placed the letter upon the piano, and as he did, the blue wax seal melted, vanishing like a tear beneath heat. From within the folded paper, a single pressed violet slipped out, landing on the keys. Samuel reached to pick it up, and as his fingertips brushed the fragile petal, he was no longer standing in the dark room. He was outside again, but not in the same rain. The sky was brighter, filled with soft daylight. The manor behind him was alive, its windows open, the air filled with laughter and the sound of distant carriages. A woman stood by the gate, holding a letter, her pale dress fluttering in the wind. It was
Eleanor.
She smiled at him, a look of relief, as though recognizing someone long lost. Samuel tried to speak, but no words came. She lifted the letter, pressing it to her heart. Then the world trembled, colors bleeding away like ink in rainwater. The light dimmed. The laughter faded. And Samuel found himself once again in the empty music room. The letter gone, the piano silent. Only the violet remained, resting upon the keys. His breath shook as he whispered, "What happened to you?" The silence answered with another creak, another sigh, another echo of something unfinished. And through the open window, the rain began again, soft, rhythmic, almost kind. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The rain outside the window fell in a soft, steady rhythm like the turning of fragile pages. Samuel stood still in the dim light of the music room, staring at the violet that lay upon the piano keys. Its color, faintly luminous, had not faded despite the years. He felt an ache beneath his ribs, a weight of longing that was not entirely his own. The house seemed to breathe with him, exhaling dust and silence. Somewhere within its walls, the past waited. He turned from the piano and noticed a narrow door tucked behind a velvet curtain. Its brass knob was cold to the touch, as though it had not been turned for decades. When he opened it, the scent of paper and rain-worn wood drifted out. Inside, he found a small study, shelves warped by damp, a writing desk covered with brittle envelopes, and a candle burned down to a pool of wax long solidified. He lit his lantern and stepped closer. The flickering light revealed what looked like a diary, bound in faded blue leather, its clasp half broken. He hesitated, then opened it. The ink inside had bled in places, the words curling like vines across the page. The handwriting was graceful, elegant, patient, deliberate. October 12th, 1901. De Reynas. Tea stopped for 3 days. Father says the flood will not reach us, but I feel the house listening, as though it remembers every storm that has ever come before. Samuel traced the lines with his finger, his pulse quickening. I dreamed again of the postman by the gate. He carried no letters, only a lantern, and he called my name, though we have never met. When I woke, the window was open, and the rain had wet the floor. Mother said it was only wind, but I saw footprints where none should be. Samuel closed his eyes. His name had not been written there, yet the image was clear. Too precise, too alive. He read on. October 14th. Tonight, the river rose above the bridge. I can hear it breathing. Father has locked the cellar. He says it's only for safety. But the air below smells strange, like candle smoke and salt. I asked him about the letters we found by the gate last week, the ones addressed to no one. And he told me never to speak of them again. The pages crackled under his thumb as he turned them. October 16th. The storm is worse. The piano keeps playing, even when no one is near. Mother says it is the house settling. But I think it's remembering. I dreamt again of the man with the lantern. This time, he looked afraid. Samuel's breath trembled. The candlelight bent and flickered against the walls. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the valley. Distant but persistent, as though echoing the words on the page. He turned one more leaf, the last one still intact. October 17th. If someone finds this, please tell him I forgive him. The rain will take everything tonight, but perhaps in another time, someone will remember. Beneath it, a pressed violet, identical to the one on the piano, was glued carefully between the pages. He touched it gently, and once again that faint pulse of warmth moved through his fingertips, like a heartbeat caught between worlds. Suddenly, the lantern dimmed. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hall, slow, deliberate, almost tender. Samuel Frosse. Is someone there? He whispered. But the words barely left his lips. The air grew colder, and in the shimmer of the fading light, he saw a reflection on the glass of the window, not his own, but hers. Eleanor stood behind him, her figure faint as mist, her eyes filled with both sorrow and calm. She didn't speak. Instead, she gestured toward the diary, then toward the stairs. Her hand lingered in the air, translucent and trembling. Samuel tried to ask her what she wanted, but before he could form the words, lightning flashed, and she was gone. The house exhaled once more, the sound low and mournful, like a sigh too long held. Samuel clutched the diary against his chest and stepped back into the hallway. The portraits seemed to shift as he passed, their eyes glimmering faintly in the flicker of his light. The rain had grown heavier again, beating against the windows like fingertips. He stopped at the landing, glancing once more toward the music room below. For the briefest moment, he thought he heard that same melody, the one his mother used to hum, the one Eleanor must have played long ago. It drifted upward, fragile as smoke, until it dissolved into silence. Samuel whispered, "I remember." And for the first time that night, the rain outside seemed to soften, almost as if it, too, had been waiting for that. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The night deepened as Samuel descended the stairs. each step echoing through the empty halls like the fading heartbeat of the house itself. The diary pressed close against his chest felt warm, as though the ink within it still breathed. Rain whispered along the window panes, weaving soft threads of sound that mingled with the sigh of the wind. The air was heavier now, rich with the scent of wet wood and candle smoke, and somewhere beneath it all was another scent, faint, metallic, almost like river water. Samuel reached the main floor, pausing at the foot of the grand staircase. The shadows seemed thicker here, gathering in corners where the lamplights dared not touch. He lifted the lantern higher, and the beams swept across the parlor, revealing furniture draped in white sheets, an abandoned teacup resting on a piano bench, and a portrait half fallen from the wall. The eyes of the woman in the painting seemed to shimmer with tears. He could still feel Eleanor's presence, a quiet pull in the air, gentle yet insistent, drawing him toward the back of the house. There, behind a half-open door, he found the entrance to the cellar, the one mentioned in her diary. The handle was rusted, the wood swollen by years of rain. "When est Pouillet?" It groaned, as though reluctant to remember. A chill drifted upward from the darkness below. He hesitated only for a moment, then began his descent. The steps creaked under his weight, each one sinking slightly as if resisting the intrusion. The air grew colder, thicker, as if the walls themselves held on to the damp breath of history. The lantern's flame wavered, painting brief ghosts of light across stone and shadow. At the bottom, he found the cellar not empty, but cluttered with the remnants of another life: crates, broken furniture, and stacks of letters tied neatly with faded ribbon. His breath caught. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each envelope sealed in blue wax, each one marked un. He knelt and brushed the dust from the topmost stack. The handwriting was the same as the letter he had carried Eleanor's. His fingers trembled as he untied the ribbon. Inside the first envelope was a short note, written in haste. "If you find these, please forgive me. We only wanted to keep them safe." The second held a different message. "The water is rising. Father says the letters must not be destroyed. They hold names that should be forgotten." Samuel frowned. The air around him shifted, a low hum building within the stone walls, like the earth remembering something buried deep. He picked up another bundle and noticed a symbol stamped in wax. A small circle enclosing a spiral, the kind once used by secret societies or old fraternal orders. He whispered to himself. What were they hiding? As if in answer, a drop of water fell from above. Then another. The ceiling groaned. Rainwater seeped through the cracks, tracing thin silver veins down the wall. The cellar began to fill with a low murmur. Not the sound of rain, but of voices layered and indistinct, as though whispering through the years. Samuel stood still, gripping the lantern. The flame flickered, stretching shadows into long shapes that moved, though nothing else stirred. One voice rose above the others, soft, trembling, unmistakably hers. Samuel. He turned toward the sound, heart thudding. At the far end of the cellar, near the base of the old furnace, a figure shimmered in the dim light. Eleanor stood there, pale and translucent, her eyes filled with sorrow and something like hope. Her lips moved, and though the sound was faint, he could hear every word as if it were spoken inside his mind. They drowned the truth to save their name. The letters were never meant to be sent. Samuel swallowed hard. What? Truth? He asked, but the lantern dimmed before he could take another step. The shadows around the furnace thickened, swirling like ink in water. He saw flashes brief, fragmented images, a man sealing crates by candlelight, a woman weeping, the roar of a river breaking its banks, letters floating like pale petals on black water. Then, silence. The image vanished, leaving only the flicker of his trembling light. Eleanor's form began to fade, her expression gentle, resigned. "You found me," she whispered. "Now find him." Who, e cahier daut paternem, dissolved into the hum of this storm. The lantern sputtered once, then steadied. The cellar was quiet again, save for the soft drip of rain and the beating of his heart. He looked down at the scattered letters, the ink blurred, the seals melting in the damp air. Beneath them, carved faintly into the stone floor, were initials Hivi, and beside them another set. S.W. Samuel's own. He felt the air catch in his lungs. The candlelight wavered as the truth settled over him like the weight of the rain above. Somehow, this had all been written before. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. For a long moment, Samuel stood in the cellar, unmoving, the sound of the rain above him becoming something deeper. Not mere weather, but memory. The initials carved into the stone glimmered faintly beneath the lantern's trembling light, as if the stone itself remembered the hand that made them. E, V, and S. He traced them with his fingertips. The edges were worn, softened by time. Yet when his skin touched the grooves, a pulse of warmth spread through him, slow, rhythmic, like the beating of two hearts that once shared the same silence, his own initials. The coincidence was impossible, yet there they were, carved long before he was born. He swallowed hard, his breath visible in the cold air. Around him, the cellar seemed to breathe again. The walls whispered softly. The letters on the floor shivered in the lantern glow, and the faint scent of lavender drifted through the damp. He thought of the diary, of the words Eleanor had written in that final entry. If someone finds this, please tell him I forgive him. Forgive him. The phrase circled in his mind, winding tighter with each repetition until it became part of the rhythm of the rain. He picked up the diary again and turned to the inside cover. There, hidden beneath the spine, was something he hadn't noticed before, a folded photograph, browned with age, its edges curled like autumn leaves. He lifted it carefully. The image showed the front gate of the Vane estate, years before it had fallen into ruin. Standing beside it was Eleanor, smiling faintly, her eyes the color of twilight. Beside her was a man in a postal uniform, the same uniform Samuel wore, the same badge number. The resemblance was uncanny, almost cruel. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him, the ground seeming to sway like a deck on dark water. "No," he whispered, though he wasn't sure what he was denying: the photograph, the memory, or the strange certainty that this had all happened before. Te estirred. The lantern's flame bent sideways, fluttering toward the staircase. From somewhere above, faint music began, the same melody that had haunted every corner of the house. The piano's notes were clear this time, as if the rain itself were playing them. He followed the sound up the stairs, moving slowly, the diary still clutched in his hand. Each step felt like walking deeper into a dream he could not wake from. When he reached the parlor, the air shimmered with soft blue light. The furniture that had been draped in sheets now stood bare, polished, alive. The fireplace burned gently, casting a golden glow over the room. And there, by the piano, sat Eleanor. She was not the ghostly figure of before, but whole, her skin luminous, her dress the same pale blue he'd seen in the portrait. She was writing, a quill in hand, her expression calm but distant. Samuel took a slow step forward. "Eleanor," he breathed. Say looked up, her gaze meeting his, and in that moment the air seemed to stop moving. "You're late," she said softly, her voice like rain against glass. The storm came sooner than we thought. He didn't know what to say. He wanted to tell her that he was from another time, that he had found her letters, that he didn't understand what this place was, but the words caught in his throat. She smiled faintly, almost knowingly. "You came back," she said, and then her eyes filled with tears. "You always do." The fire flickered, and the edges of the room began to blur. The colors melted into one another, like watercolor dissolving in rain. The piano played on, though her hands no longer touched the keys. "Why am I here?" Samuel whispered. "Because," she said, her voice fading with the light, "you never delivered the last letter." He looked down, and in his hands was no longer the diary, but the same pale blue envelope he had found on his route, the wax seal gleaming faintly. "For Eleanor Vane, delivered by moonlight." He turned it over, and the writing shifted again. "For Samuel Whitford, to remember." The paper pulsed, warm, alive. The rain outside intensified, a slow crescendo that filled every silence. The fire dimmed. Eleanor's figure dissolved into mist, her final words echoing in the still air. "Not all letters are meant to arrive in this world." And then she was gone. The room returned to its ruin, cold, empty, dust settling in the pale light. Samuel stood alone, the envelope trembling in his hand. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single line, written in that graceful script he now knew too well. Some promises wait across lifetimes. He felt something loosen within him, a sorrow he had never named, lifting like mist at dawn. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. The first light of morning touched the window pane, and for the first time the house no longer felt haunted. It felt at rest. Samuel closed his eyes, letting the quiet settle through him. Somewhere faintly, a piano note lingered, soft, distant, forgiving. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The storm had passed by the time Samuel stepped outside. The dawn was soft and silver, the kind of morning that feels too fragile to touch. Mist clung low over the ground, drifting between the trees like quiet memories finding their way home. The Vane house stood behind him, silent at last. Its windows no longer glowed, its walls no longer whispered. The rain had washed away the dust of years, leaving only a faint shimmer across the roof tiles, as though the house itself had been baptized by time. Samuel turned once more to look at it. The sky above the manor was the color of faded lavender, streaked with pale gold. A single window on the upper floor caught the first light of day. The music room. He could almost imagine Eleanor standing there, her hand upon the glass, watching him go, her reflection merging with the morning. The thought lingered like a heartbeat. He lifted the letter, the last of them, and held it against his chest. The ink had already begun to fade, the paper soft with age, yet he could still feel the warmth of it, faint as breath. The words she had written echoed within him. Some promises wait across lifetimes. He didn't fully understand what it meant, but somehow it felt true, like something he had always known but never spoken aloud. The road beyond the gate was slick with rain, the puddles reflecting a pale blue sky. As he walked, the sound of his boots against the wet gravel mixed with the distant murmur of the waking town. Somewhere, a rooster crowed. Somewhere else, a train whistle called across the valley. Its echo carried on the cool morning air. Everything felt quieter, softer, as if the world itself had exhaled. He stopped by the gate, where the ivy hung heavy with dew. That was where the photograph had been taken, Eleanor smiling beneath her parasol, the man beside her frozen forever in black and white. Samuel brushed his fingers over the iron bars, cold and wet beneath his touch. In the curve of the metal, he saw faint initials scratched into the paint. Evie intertwined with SW. It was no illusion. They had been there all along, waiting beneath layers of rust and time. He smiled faintly, a sad, peaceful smile. "I remember," he whispered. The words carried softly by the wind. The clouds above began to thin, and sunlight slipped through, gold and fragile. It touched the road, the leaves, the soaked stones, and for the briefest moment, the whole valley seemed to glow. He closed his eyes and listened, not just to the quiet, but to everything hidden beneath it. He could hear the echo of piano keys, distant and slow. He could hear rain on glass. He could hear her voice, soft as a sigh, saying thank you. And for the first time, felt no fear, only stillness. When he opened his eyes again, the house behind him had begun to fade into the mist. Whether it was the light or his imagination, he could not tell. He only knew that something within it, something restless and sorrowful, had finally found peace. He began walking down the hill toward Windmere Hollow, the letter still in his hand. With every step, the landscape grew clearer. Cottages stirring awake, chimneys breathing thin ribbons of smoke, the river flashing with light where the sun touched its surface. He passed the post office, its door half open, the smell of paper and ink drifting out to meet him. On the counter lay an old postal ledger, open to a blank page, without quite knowing why. Samuel set the letter down upon it. The paper gleamed faintly in the sunlight, as if grateful to rest. He picked up his pen and wrote a single line at the bottom, "Delivered at last." Then he placed his cap on the counter, turned, and stepped back into the morning. The air was crisp, the sky clearing. The birds had begun to sing. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel lost. The road stretched before him, damp, glimmering, endless. Behind him, somewhere deep within the fog, a faint chord sounded. One final note from the piano in the house that no longer waited. He smiled. Some stories do not end. They simply sleep, waiting for the next rain to wake them. As he walked into the rising light, the mist thinned, and the valley opened like a page turning toward day. and though he could no longer hear her voice, he carried her words with him, written not on paper, but somewhere quieter, in the space between heartbeats, in the hush between raindrops. Some promises wait across lifetimes. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The rain had returned to Windmere Hollow. Not the fierce storm of years gone by, but a quiet, steady drizzle that softened everything it touched. The newly restored Vane house stood at the edge of the town, its windows glowing faintly in the grey morning light, as if remembering the warmth of a fire long extinguished. Ivy crept once more along its walls, though the stones beneath had been scrubbed clean, polished, made new. The past, it seemed, had been painted over, but not forgotten. Inside, a young woman named Clara Monroe walked through the hall with cautious steps. She was an archivist, brought in from Boston to catalog the history of the estate for a local museum. Her boots echoed softly across the oak floor, each step stirring the faint smell of rain-soaked timber. She paused by the music room door, her hand brushing against the restored handle. It was cold to the touch, but something about it made her heart stutter. She turned it gently. The door opened with a sigh. The room beyond was filled with pale light, the kind that makes dust shimmer like snow. The old piano had been repaired, its keys gleaming ivory white once more. On the windowsill lay a small glass vase with wildflowers someone had placed there earlier that week, their petals trembling under the weight of raindrops. Clara stepped closer, drawn by the faintest scent of lavender and something older parchment, perhaps, or candle wax that no longer existed. Her reflection met her in the rain-streaked glass, blurred, doubled. For a moment, she thought she saw someone else standing beside her, a woman in an old-fashioned gown, her hair pinned neatly, her eyes distant and full of longing. But when Clara blinked, there was only her own reflection, framed the mist. She laughed softly, embarrassed by her imagination, yet the air in the room felt charged, like a breath waiting to be released. On the piano bench sat a small wooden box, half open, as though forgotten in haste. Clara hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside were several envelopes, sealed and yellowed, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. She drew one out carefully. The handwriting was looping, graceful, distinctly old. Bename Redan Samuel Whitaker. Her pulse quickened. She had read about him in the archives, a postmaster from the late 1800s, presumed lost in a flood. No one had ever found his remains, only the remnants of a mailbag scattered near the riverbank. She untied the ribbon slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. The first letter began with "My dearest Samuel, if ever these words reach you." The ink had faded, but the emotion still clung to every line. Clara felt something stirred deep within her chest, a familiarity she couldn't explain, like recognizing a song she'd never heard before. The room grew quieter, the sound of rain on the window softening to a rhythmic murmur. She read on, the world around her slipping away. The letter spoke of waiting, of storms, of promises that defied time. It spoke of music played in the dark, and letters lost in the rain. Clara's eyes lingered on that phrase, letters lost in the rain, and her breath caught. For an instant, she thought she heard the faint sound of a piano note behind her, a single tone drawn out into silence. Se, turn. No one was there. Only the piano, gleaming faintly in the dim light, its lid closed, its keys unmoving. The reflection in the window shimmered again. Two figures now, standing side by side, one in a grey cardigan, the other in a gown that belonged to another century. Clara took a step forward. The scent of lavender deepened, and a drop of rain rolled down the window like a tear. Then the light flickered, as though the house itself had inhaled. And just like that, everything went still. She placed the letter gently on the piano, her hand lingering over the paper. Her reflection stared back, uncertain, as if the woman in the glass waited for her to speak. Outside, the rain continued, steady, endless, patient. Somewhere deep within the house, a floorboard creaked, followed by the faint whisper of turning pages. Clara whispered softly to the empty room, "I'll keep your story safe." The words echoed faintly, almost answered by the sigh of wind through the eaves. And for a heartbeat, she thought she heard another voice, faint and warm. "Thank you." As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. That night, the rain deepened. It was not the wild storm of a century ago, but a tender, ceaseless drizzle that wrapped the town of Windmere Hollow in a hush. Inside the Vane house, Clara sat in the library, surrounded by open boxes and papers that smelled faintly of time. Candlelight trembled in a glass jar beside her, casting warm ripples across the walls. The sound of the rain on the roof was steady, almost hypnotic, like a soft heartbeat. She had spent hours reading through the letters she'd found, her eyes growing heavy, her thoughts drifting between the words and the whispers that seemed to follow them. The letters spoke of love constrained by circumstance, of secrets exchanged between Eleanor Vane and Samuel Whittaker, letters that were never meant to survive the storm, yet somehow had. Clara traced her finger over the paper, feeling the impressions of the pen, as though the emotion itself had been pressed into the page. The last letter she read ended abruptly. Mid-sentence, the ink blurred by water, the word forever trailing into a smudge. She leaned back, exhaling. The house creaked softly, settling in the rain. A faint chill brushed her arm. She looked toward the window. Outside, the garden was a blur of shadows, the flowers bending under the steady drizzle. The air shimmered faintly, as if something unseen had passed between the raindrops. And then music. Soft, deliberate. A single note on the piano. Clara Frosse. The library was 2 rooms away from the music room, and no one else was in the house tonight. The note came again, fragile, uncertain, like a memory testing the air. She rose slowly, candle in and the flame bending with each careful step. The hallway stretched long and dim, lined with portraits that seemed to watch her as she passed. At the end of the corridor, the door to the music room stood slightly ajar. Light spilled from within, not electric, but silvery, diffuse, like moonlight through water. Clara pushed the door open with a trembling hand. The piano lid was open now, though she was certain she had left it closed. The keys gleamed faintly, and on the bench sat the blue ribbon that had once bound the letters together. It was untied, the edges damp, as if someone had been holding it in the rain. She whispered softly, "Eleanor." The name felt strange on her tongue, yet familiar, as though she had spoken it before in a dream. For a long moment, Nothing moved. The air was thick with quiet. Then a gust of wind swept through the room, flickering the candle. The music sheets on the stand rustled, turning themselves to a page titled Nocturne in Rain. Clara's breath caught. She stepped closer, her reflection merging with the darkness of the piano lid. In the glossy surface, she saw not her own face, but another, faint, translucent, eyes downcast, lips curved in the shadow of a smile. The woman in the reflection looked at her with quiet recognition. "You kept your promise," a voice whispered, though no lips moved. Clara's candor trembled in her grasp. Her heart should have raced, but it didn't. Instead, she felt an ache, deep and tender, as if some long-forgotten longing had finally found its echo. The woman in the reflection, Eleanor, she knew it, now reached toward her, and though their hands never touched, Clara felt warmth brush her skin, like sunlight filtered through mist. The scent of lavender filled the air again, stronger this time, mixed with rain and old paper. The pages of the letters behind her fluttered, though there was no breeze. Then, as suddenly as it began, the vision faded. The piano closed itself with a gentle sigh. The candle's flame steadied. The only sound left was the rain, endless, patient, ancient. Clara stood for a long moment, her hand pressed against her chest, the echo of that warmth still pulsing faintly. She whispered, "What do you want me to see?" And though the room offered no reply, her eyes were drawn to the window. There, on the glass, faint words had formed in condensation, written as if by invisible fingers. "Read the last one." Clara turned back to the desk. The final envelope lay half hidden beneath the others, its seal unbroken. She reached for it, her breath trembling. The wax cracked softly, and as she unfolded the paper, the candlelight dimmed, the rain outside quickened, and a single piano note sounded once more, low and mournful, like the sound of memory itself awakening. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The rain had deepened into a quiet rhythm by the time Clara unfolded the final letter. The candle beside her flickered once, as though the air itself had drawn in a breath. The paper was older than the rest, its edges torn and softened by water. The ink faded to the color of smoke. At the top, written in an elegant, trembling hand, were the words, "My last night before the storm." Clara felt the world narrow around her. The sound of rain softened to a distant hum, and the room seemed to lean closer, listening with her. She began to read. "My dearest Samuel," the letter began, "the river is rising faster than they say. The sky feels heavy, like the world is holding its breath. I write by candlelight, though I fear the wind will take it soon. If these words find you, know that I have done what I must." The lines wavered, smudged by droplets. "Father forbids me to see you," he says. "Your name will ruin us. He has locked the doors, but I have found a way through the garden gate. At midnight, when the bell tolls once, I will leave this house and meet you by the river. They will call me foolish, but I will not live in a world where love is a ghost." Clara's heart tightened. Her fingers trembled against the paper. The next lines grew uneven, hurried. "If the river takes me, promise me you will keep the letter safe. Promise me you will not forget the sound of rain, for it is the only thing that belongs to both of us." The signature at the end, Eleanor Barney was smeared almost to nothing. The candlelight dimmed, and a soft chill crept through the room. Clara closed her eyes, whispering the words under her breath. At midnight, by the river. She felt something stir behind her, faint and slow, like a sigh. The piano's lid had opened again. Though she hadn't heard it move, a single note sounded, not random, but deliberate. The first of a melody she recognized now from the title on the page, Nocturne in Rain. She turned. Her reflection in the piano's surface once again doubled. This time she did not flinch. The woman's face, Eleanor's, was clearer than before, her eyes shimmering like the river at night. He never came, Eleanor's voice whispered, soft as water sliding through reeds. He promised he would meet me, but the flood took the bridge before dawn. I waited, Samuel. I waited until the river forgot my name. The candle flame bent low, casting the room into trembling gold. Clara's breath came shallow, her voice barely more than a whisper. Dith come. Trith, he wrote to you. The reflection tilted its head, sorrow and longing woven into one expression. I never saw his words. The storm carried them away. Clara's heart pounded gently, not from fear, but from grief that did not belong entirely to her. Then maybe that's why I found them, she said. So you could read them now? The reflection shimmered, her outline softening, breaking into ripples of light. The scent of lavender filled the air again, deep and sweet. You are kind, the voice murmured, and perhaps you understand, because you have waited too. The word struck something inside Clara she could not name. Her eyes stung. The rain outside grew louder, as if echoing some truth neither time nor death could drown. What happened to you? Clara asked quietly. Did the river? The rest of the question dissolved in her throat. The reflection smiled faintly, a smile of both peace and sorrow. The river remembers, she said. It carries everything that was lost. And with that the image began to fade, the candlelight drawing her back into shadow. Clara stepped forward, reaching out. Her fingers brushed cold air, and for a heartbeat she felt the weight of another hand, soft, trembling, human. Then it was gone. The piano closed itself again with a sigh, the echo drifting into silence. Clara stood still, the final letter pressed against her chest. She whispered, I'll take it to the river. Outside, thunder rolled far. In the distance, not a threat, but a memory returning. The house grew quiet again, the air heavy with rain and ghosts of lavender. Clara blew out the candle, the smoke curling upward like a spirit released in the darkness. Her voice was barely audible. You won't be forgotten. Beyond the window, lightning flashed once, illuminating the valley below, the same river that had swallowed a century of secrets. It shimmered silver in the night, winding like a path waiting to be followed. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Night returned with a softness that almost felt deliberate, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was about to come. The rain had begun again, thin, silvery, whispering against the glass of the old Vane house. Clara stood in the entryway, her coat drawn tight, the final letter held carefully beneath her arm. The air smelled of wet stone and memory. Every step she took echoed faintly through the corridor, as though the house were watching, listening, waiting. When she opened the front door, the sound of rain filled her ears, gentle but endless. The town below lay blurred under mist, the lamps along the main road glowing like distant candles on a forgotten altar. The path to the river wound down through the hollow, overgrown with grass that glistened in the rain. She walked slowly, her boots sinking into the soft earth, the letter held close against her chest. Lightning flickered far away, not harsh, but pale and slow, revealing the outline of the valley, the dark sweep of trees, the river glinting faintly like a serpent of light. As she walked, Clara could almost feel another presence beside her, a quiet rhythm that matched her breath. The scent of lavender drifted faintly through the rain. Somewhere behind her, in the distance, a piano note sounded, clear as a bell. It followed her, one tone at a time, like footsteps made of sound. She did not turn back. She knew who it was. When she reached the edge of the river, the rain softened into mist. The water was high, moving slow and dark beneath a veil of fog. The old stone bridge, rebuilt after a century, stood in silence above it. Clara stopped by the bank where reeds bent under the weight of water. The same place Eleanor had described, the place where she had waited. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest murmur of voices, impossible to place. She knelt, her hand trembling slightly as she unfolded the letter. The paper, though fragile, seemed untouched by time now. It looked almost new in the moonlight. She whispered softly, "Eleanor, I brought it back." Her words dissolved into the rain. Then, movement. Across the river, where the mist thickened, a figure appeared, faint at first, then clearer, shaped by light and shadow. A woman in a long dress, her hair unbound, her hands clutching something close to her heart. Clara felt no fear. She only felt recognition, like waking from a dream she had been living all along. The figure raised her head. Through the rain, Clara saw the face she had come to know through ink and memory. Eleanor Bane, her expression both sorrowful and serene. The wind stirred the water between them. Another light flickered behind the ghostly woman, the faint form of a man standing on the opposite bank, coat dark with rain, hat pressed low, a letter clutched in his hand. Samuel. They faced each other across the current, the river whispering between them like time refusing to part. For a long moment, no one moved. The rain fell harder, blurring their outlines, turning them to shadows of silver and smoke. Then Eleanor lifted her hand, and the air shimmered. The letter in Clara's grasp grew warm. She held it out, and a gust of wind lifted it from her palm, carrying it across the river like a fragile white bird. It landed softly in Eleanor's waiting hand. The woman smiled, not at Clara, but through her, as though she could see the thread connecting all of them. Then she turned to Samuel. Their hands met across the space between rain and reflection. Light rippled outward, spreading through the mist, through the water, through the air itself. The sound of the piano swelled, slow, beautiful, sorrowful nocturne in rain. The melody filled the valley, the notes mingling with the rhythm of water, the hum of the storm. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, and then, as the final note faded, so did they. The figures dissolved into the mist, leaving only the rain, the river, and the echo of music drifting through the hollow. Clara stood very still, her hair wet against her cheeks, tears indistinguishable from rain. The air around her felt lighter, the tension that had haunted the valley for generations finally lifting like fog under morning light. She whispered, "They found each other." A breeze stirred the reeds in answer. When she looked down, the blue ribbon from the letters lay coiled at her feet, clean and untied, its color bright once more. She picked it up and smiled faintly. The rain began to fade, the sound turning soft like distant applause. Far above, the clouds parted, revealing a sliver of moonlight breaking through. It touched the river, the path, the house beyond the hill, and for the first time in a century, Windmere Hollow slept in peace. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. Morning came quietly to Windmere Hollow. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the valley washed clean and trembling with silver light. Mist drifted low across the fields, and every leaf along the road shimmered with tiny beads of water. The air smelt of wet earth, lavender, and something faintly metallic, the scent that follows a long storm. Clara walked back toward the Vane house, her boots dark with mud, the blue ribbon folded carefully in her pocket. Her mind felt still, like the air after thunder, and though she had barely slept, there was no heaviness in her body, only a quiet calm. When she reached the front gate, she paused. The old house stood before her, its windows catching the pale morning sun, each pane reflecting soft gold. For the first time, it didn't look haunted, it looked awake. She pushed open the gate, the iron creaking softly, and stepped inside. The foyer smelled faintly of damp wood and rain-soaked paper. A few candles had burned out in the night, their wax melted into soft pools along the mantel. The silence was gentle, no longer watchful. Clara set her coat aside and made her way toward the music room. The door, which had always groaned on its hinges, opened soundlessly now. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows, warming the piano's polished surface. She stood for a long time, listening. No music, no whispers, no footsteps, only the soft drip of rain from the eaves outside. Yet somehow, she knew she was not alone. On the piano bench lay something that had not been there before. A single lavender sprig, freshly cut, its scent filling the air. Beneath it, a sheet of paper, the final page of Nocturne in Rain. The handwriting at the bottom was faint but unmistakable, the same elegant cursive she had seen in Eleanor's letters. Just one line, "Thank you for finishing the song." Clara felt her breath catch. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the page. The ink cooled beneath her skin. For a moment, she thought she heard the faintest echo of the melody, not from the piano, but from the very air, as if the walls themselves remembered the music. She smiled softly, tears forming but not falling. Outside, the sunlight grew stronger, breaking through the last traces of mist. Dust motes floated in the air, turning gold. She sat on the bench, her hand resting on the piano keys. When she pressed one, the sound that emerged was deep and clean, as though the instrument itself had been reborn. She played a slow, hesitant note, then another. The chords were gentle, unsure at first, ten smoother like raindrops, finding their rhythm. She closed her eyes, and began to play the melody she had heard in her dreams, the one that had followed her through every whisper and every letter. Nocturne in rain. The notes filled the room, slow and peaceful, carrying no sorrow now, only release. As the final chord lingered, she opened her eyes. The air shimmered faintly, and for the briefest second, she saw them. Eleanor and Samuel, standing near the window, their figures translucent in the sunlight. Eleanor's hand rested on his arm, her gaze warm and calm. They smiled at Clara, not in farewell, but in gratitude. Then they faded into the light, leaving only the soft glow of morning behind. Clara exhaled, her heart full and quiet. She gathered the ribbon, the lavender, and the page, placing them gently inside the wooden box that once held the letters. As she closed the lid, she whispered, "Resna, your story is safe." She stood by the window, watching the last droplets fall from the ivy leaves. Outside, Windmere Hollow shimmered. Below, peaceful, reborn. Somewhere a church bell rang once, marking the hour. The sound echoed through the valley like a benediction. Clara is Milet. She would stay a while longer, she decided. Maybe write the history of the house, tell its story properly, not as tragedy, but as a love that outlived time. Behind her, the piano gave one soft, final note, a low hum that faded into silence, like a sigh of contentment. Outside, the clouds parted completely, and sunlight touched the garden where new lavender had begun to bloom. The house was no longer waiting. It was listening. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. The rain returned 3 days later, soft, lingering, and filled with a strange familiarity. Clara stood by the window of the Vane house, watching the droplets slide across the glass. The garden below shimmered under the mist, each flower bending gently beneath the weight of water. The lavender had bloomed more fully since that morning she played the nocturne. It was as though the earth itself had exhaled. She had spent her days quietly cataloguing the letters, repairing old bindings, sealing the fragile paper between layers of soft parchment. Each word felt sacred, like a memory preserved in amber. Tonight, the last candle flickered on her desk, casting pale gold across the pages. Outside, the air carried the scent of rain and the faintest echo of music, almost too soft to be real. Clara smiled to herself. She had begun to sleep again, deeply, peacefully, though her dreams were not empty. Sometimes she saw Eleanor in them, walking along the garden path, her parasol open against the drizzle. Sometimes it was Samuel, standing beneath the willow trees, his eyes lifted toward the sky. They never spoke. They didn't need to. Their silence was the kind that said everything. Tomorrow, Clara would leave Windmere Hollow. The archive would be stored safely in the county library, and the house, she decided, would remain as it was, untouched, waiting only for sunlight and the sound of rain. She had written her report, typed each word carefully. The haunting at the Vane house was not an unrest, but an unfinished song. Its echoes were of longing, not of fear. She placed the paper on the desk, beside the lavender sprig that never seemed to wilt. The hour was late, and the fire had burned down to its last glowing embers. She sat for a while in the quiet, listening. The storm outside deepened, the rhythm steady, comforting, like the heartbeat of the valley. Then, just before midnight, she heard it. A single note from the piano, low, tender, unmistakable. It lingered in the air, resonant and pure. She turned toward the sound. The music room was dark, except for the faint glow of moonlight through the rain. Clara walked slowly, her bare feet brushing against the cool floorboards. When she reached the piano, her breath caught. Upon the bench lay a single envelope, pale and worn, sealed with a drop of blue wax. Her name was written across it in the same looping cursive as the letters. For Clara? She hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was one small note, barely a sentence long. The rain remembers you now. Thank you for listening. For a long time, Clara stood motionless, the words sinking deep into her heart. Then, with a soft exhale, she smiled through her tears. She set the note on the piano, pressing one key, the same note she had heard moments before. It echoed softly, fading into the rhythm of the rain. She whispered, "Good night, Eleanor." The candle flickered. 10 went out. The house grew still. Yet in that stillness, the sound of the rain seemed to change, the droplets now falling in soft, measured intervals, like notes from a distant melody. The walls held their breath. Somewhere in the upper halls, a door creaked gently and then closed, not with dread, but with peace. Clara stepped to the window once more. The world outside shimmered silver and gray, endless, forgiving. The valley lights twinkled below, and she thought she could see the faint outline of two figures walking hand in hand beneath the willow trees, translucent, content-free. She whispered a small prayer of gratitude, not to any god, but to the quiet itself, to the rain, to the night, to the memories that had chosen her. When she finally lay down on the couch near the fire, the scent of lavender drifted around her like a soft blanket. She closed her eyes, and the sound of rain filled her mind. Steady, tender, eternal. It felt less like a storm and more like a lullaby written by time itself. Somewhere, beyond dreams, a piano played one last refrain, a melody meant for no one and everyone at once. And as the final notes dissolved into silence, the vain house rested, no longer burdened, but whole. As the story fades, allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep,